So in terms of what's next, we're going to see airstrikes on Hamas targets, as well as ground actions in Gaza. But before we look at the response to all of this, and why I think it's so important to understand that the response to this is why the murder of Jews will just keep happening, I want to hammer home the point that there is no moral equivalence between Hamas and Israel. Hamas invaded Israel by surprise during a religious holiday and murdered civilians in their beds, in their homes, in their streets. They kidnapped women, the elderly, and children, dragging them off to be raped and murdered. Israel, the victim here, warned civilians in Gaza, many of whom support Hamas, to leave. Israel, like it always does, fired warning shots to give civilians time to evacuate, even though that means Hamas can evacuate too. Israel, despite what many smooth-brained morons on social media are saying, will not carpet bomb Gaza because Israel, whether you like their policies or not, respects life. Hamas and the people who support them do not. This saying is like a broken record at this point, but it's true. If the Palestinians decided they wanted peace and laid down their weapons, there would be peace today. If the Israelis did the same, they would all be murdered. So with that in mind, with a tiny snapshot of the unimaginable horror of what's going on, what was the response to all of this in the United States? Well, here's the thing. Yes, the vast majority of responses were of shock and outrage and mourning, with political leaders, celebrities, public figures, and private individuals all coming out and condemning what can only be described as terrorism. But there were some notable responses that are not only disgusting, but they are part of the problem. So first off, Joe Biden and his administration. Here's how he responded hours after the attack began, probably because Joey needed a nap and otherwise he gets a bit cranky.
Good afternoon. Today, the people of Israel are under attack, orchestrated by a terrorist organization, Hamas. In this moment of tragedy, I want to say to them and to the world and to terrorists everywhere that the United States stands with Israel. We will not ever fail to have their back. We'll make sure that they have the help their citizens need and they can continue to defend themselves. You know, the world's seen appalling images. Thousands of rockets in a space of hours raining down on Israeli cities. I got up this morning and started this at 7:30, 8 o'clock, my calls. Hamas terrorists crossing in Israel, killing not only Israeli soldiers, but Israeli civilians. In the street, in their homes, innocent people murdered, wounded, entire families taken hostage by Hamas. Just days after Israel marked the holiest of days in the Jewish calendar. It's unconscionable. You know, when I spoke with Prime Minister Netanyahu this morning, I told him the United States stands with the people of Israel in the face of these terrorist assaults. Israel has the right to defend itself and its people, full stop. There's never justification for terrorist attacks. And my administration's support for Israel's security is rock solid and unwavering. Let me say this as clearly as I can. This is not a moment for any party hostile to Israel to exploit these attacks to seek advantage. The world is watching. I've also been in contact with the King of Jordan, spoke with members of Congress, directed my national security team to engage with their Israeli counterparts, military to military, intelligence to intelligence, diplomat to diplomat, to make sure Israel has what it needs. I've also directed my team to remain in constant contact with leaders throughout the region, including Egypt, Turkey, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Oman, the UAE, as well as our European partners and the Palestinian Authority. It's also a terrible tragedy on a human level. It's hurting innocent people. Seeing the lives that have been broken by this, the families torn apart, it's heartbreaking. And Jill and I are praying for those families who've been impacted by this violence. We grieve with those who've lost their loved ones, lost a piece of their soul. We have hope for swift recovery for many who have been wounded. We're going to remain in close touch with Prime Minister. I personally am going to remain in close contact with Prime Minister Netanyahu as this situation continues to develop. And let there be no mistake, the United States stands with the state of Israel, just as we have from the moment the United States became the first nation to recognize Israel 11 minutes after its founding 75 years ago. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, was there an intelligence failure in the lead up to this attack?
Okay, things like "we stand with Israel" sounds great until you understand that this is, at least in part, Joe Biden's fault. Why? Because this is Iran's fault, and Joe Biden, like Barack Obama before him, has an obsession with enabling Iran. Just a few weeks ago, he unfroze $6 billion of Iranian assets, which I said at the time would be used to fund terrorism.
5 American citizens detained in Iran are one step closer to returning home. The Biden White House has agreed to swap prisoners, 5 Iranians for 5 Americans, and unfreeze $6 billion in Iranian money, a deal Republicans are slamming.
So not only did Joe Biden voluntarily hand Afghanistan back to the same people who protected those responsible for 9/11, he's bending over a barrel for the world's largest funder of terrorism, giving them $6 billion in ransom payments, which will go straight into the hands of the same kinds of people who flew planes into the World Trade Center 22 years ago. Joe Biden wants you talking about Alaska. Joe Biden's speech in Alaska is the distraction from his real evil. Joe Biden's disrespect for the victims of 9/11 isn't just based on the fact he couldn't be bothered to fly to New York, but because he's saying that we can never forget, wiping away fake tears with one hand and then giving away billions of dollars with the other on 9/11. Billions of dollars earmarked for one thing: terrorism. And sure, this specific money might not have paid for this, but money is fungible. If you know you have $6 billion coming soon, that frees up a lot of your cash for doing what you love best. In this case, what Iran loves doing best is killing Jews. Antony Blinken even admitted that Iran funds terrorism.
What do you say about the argument that money is fungible? So Iran may have known this money is coming and used other funds to help fund this attack that happened.
Iran has unfortunately always used and focused its funds on supporting terrorism, on supporting groups like Hamas. And it's done that when there have been sanctions, it's done that when there haven't been sanctions, and it's always prioritized that.
So why did we send them money? And also, while the Biden administration is saying it's too soon to tell if Iran was involved, the terrorists who attacked Israel said that Iran provided weapons, money, equipment, and missiles, and Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, like he's a character out of Team America, posted a video of Hamas attacking civilians with the following post: God willing, the cancer of the usurper Zionist regime will be eradicated at the hands of the Palestinian people and the resistant forces throughout the region. But who knows if Iran was involved? In the last few years, and especially in recent days, we're seeing why foreign policy matters. In the Middle East, Donald Trump showed how we can achieve peace, or at least get closer to peace. Stop believing that you can bribe terrorists into not wanting to kill us. Instead of giving Iran and Palestinian leadership seats to the table, no matter how many Americans, Israelis, or other innocents they kill, Trump showed that we can go ahead and forge peace with the rest of the Middle East who hate these people almost as much as we do. But then Joe Biden shuffles in, surrounded by morons like Antony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, and John Kerry, and goes straight back to paying ransoms to Iran and their terrorist buddies, and this is the result. But what about the other responses here at home? Well, this brings me to the Squad. And their responses prove why the fight against anti-Semitism is such an uphill battle, because even when Jews are being beaten in the street, murdered in cold blood, or dragged off to be raped, it's apparently their fault. First off, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the genius who brought us this piece of foreign policy gold.
What people are starting to see, at least in the occupation of Palestine, is just an increasing crisis of humanitarian condition.
You use the term the occupation of Palestine. What did you mean by that?
She released a statement. Today is devastating for all those seeking a lasting peace and respect for human rights in Israel and Palestine. I condemn Hamas's attack in the strongest possible terms. No child and family should ever endure this kind of violence and fear, and this violence will not solve the ongoing oppression and occupation of the region. An immediate ceasefire and de-escalation is urgently needed to save lives. Then there's Ilhan Omar, who has literally defended terrorists in her life, let alone her comments on Israel, which are straight out of the Nazi Party's playbook. Here's what she tweeted. I condemn the horrific acts we are seeing unfold today in Israel against children, women, the elderly, and the unarmed people who are being slaughtered and taken hostage by Hamas. Such senseless violence will only repeat the back-and-forth cycle we've seen, which we cannot allow to continue. We need to call for de-escalation and ceasefire. I will keep advocating for peace and justice throughout the Middle East. And then worst of the worst, unsurprisingly, Rashida Tlaib, who's Palestinian, openly hates Israel, and has said that the Holocaust gave her a warm, fuzzy feeling. So here's what she said. I grieve the Palestinian and Israeli lives lost yesterday, today, and every day. I am determined as ever to fight for a just future where everyone can live in peace, without fear, and with true freedom, equal rights, and human dignity. This is where it gets batshit insane. The path to that future must include lifting the blockade, ending the occupation, and dismantling the apartheid system that creates the suffocating, dehumanizing conditions that can lead to resistance. The failure to recognize the violent reality of living under siege, occupation, and apartheid makes no one safer. No person, no child anywhere should have to suffer or live in fear of violence. We cannot ignore the humanity in each other. As long as our country provides billions in unconditional funding to support the apartheid government, this heartbreaking cycle of violence will continue. Then there's the Ringo star of the squad, Ayanna Pressley. She tweeted, "These devastating attacks on Israelis are deeply alarming and my heart breaks for the victims and their loved ones. We need an immediate ceasefire and de-escalation. It is long past time to stop this cycle of violence and trauma and work toward a just and lasting peace in the region." And then Cori Bush came out with this statement: "I am heartbroken by the ongoing violence in Palestine and Israel, and I mourn the over 250 Israeli and 230 Palestinian lives that have been lost today, and the thousands injured following attacks by Hamas militants on Israeli border towns and Israeli military bombardment of Gaza. I strongly condemn the targeting of civilians, and I urge an immediate ceasefire and de-escalation to prevent further loss of life. Our immediate focus must be saving lives, but our ultimate focus must be on a just and lasting peace that ensures safety for everyone in the region. Violations of human rights do not justify more violations of human rights, and a military response will only exacerbate the suffering of Palestinians and Israelis alike. As part of achieving a just and lasting peace, we must do our part to stop this violence and trauma by ending US government support for Israeli military occupation and apartheid. I am continuing to closely monitor the situation, and my office is ready to support residents of the 1st District with family members and loved ones in the region." Also, a quick mention has to go to Jeremy Corbyn, who said this: "The unfolding events in Israel and Palestine are deeply alarming. We need an immediate ceasefire and urgent de-escalation, and we need a route out of this tragic cycle of violence. Ending the occupation is the only means of achieving a just and lasting peace." He also refused to condemn Hamas. But this is the same Jeremy Corbyn, best buds with AOC by the way, who called Hamas and Hezbollah friends, so hardly surprising. Notice something in all of these statements though. First off, they all use the term ceasefire and de-escalation like they were all texting each other beforehand, but more importantly, they all blame Jews for their own victimization. Sure, Jews being murdered is bad, but this only happens because they're super duper bad and evil and wrong. Let alone the fact that people are celebrating the mass murder of Jews across the Western world. This video is from London.
You're not going to understand. You already know what I'm like. I'm not ready for where I'm going and my dress sense and everything.
This one's from Germany. And they're celebrating in Canada, the same country whose government gave a Nazi a standing ovation. They talk about a cycle of violence, but ignore what's fueling this cycle: a systemic acceptance of anti-Semitism.